Nicky Ryan is a John Danaher black belt, founder member of B Team, and the youngest athlete to ever compete at ADCC. He's famously the much more likable brother of the Ryan family, and he's the unfortunate recipient of 2 torn ACLs, the most recent of which he's just undergone reconstructive surgery for. His recovery is the subject of today's video. As a fellow member of Team Rice Paper Knees, and also having had a lot of experience of working with return to play athletes in both pro and college sport, I wanted to share my thoughts on the work that he's performing with Dr. Danny Spalding at Outcome Athletics. I thought it was excellent, and I'm going to tell you why. Firstly, I thought the work that he was performing was super appropriate for this early stage recovery. What a lot of jiu-jitsu athletes fail to realize is that all injuries are to some extent brain injuries. When we experience damage like an ACL tear or surgery, the brain is going to take drastic steps to guard itself from future damage. 2 big ways in which it's going to do this is shutting down the muscle tissue to prevent large forces and limiting the range of motion to prevent any further aggravation of the injury site. In the immediate short term, this is a great thing. However, long term, it actually increases the risk of re-injuring the knee when we return to full intensity training. Consequently, one of the most important goals of early rehab is to convince the brain to reactivate that tissue and increase range of motion at the joint. He's doing this both actively with things like isometrics and unweighted knee flexion and extension, but he's also doing this passively with things like the airdyne and manual work with his PT, which is a great addition because you're basically demonstrating to the brain that the new range of motion is safe and it can take the brakes off a little bit. The second thing I really liked was the use of occlusion or blood flow restriction training. This is a methodology that has its roots in Japan, and it's been shown to stimulate as much muscle growth with just 30% of 1 rep max versus 70% without. This is because by restricting blood flow to the muscle, we're much likelier to increase things like lactic acid, which increases one of the chemical signals for muscle growth. And anytime you're able to stimulate muscle growth without heavy loads that will further aggravate the injury, that's a good thing in my opinion. Lastly, I really like the attitude being displayed both in the session and in the conversation, which is an emphasis not on what Nicky can't do, but what he can do. Sometimes when athletes are injured, there's a tendency to just stop training altogether. But with a long-term injury like an ACL, that's clearly not an option because he's going to be sat there doing nothing for 12 to 18 months. Yes, he can't bend his knee, but he can, for example, train hip abduction. He can start to bring in light deadlifts because they don't require quite so much knee flexion. And he might not be able to run, but he can ride the airdyne. And of course, he can train his upper body as heavy as he likes. So while injury can be an incredibly frustrating time, I think it's important to reframe it as an opportunity to work as hard as possible on the other stuff, and maybe even make gains in areas that might not normally be possible thanks to a condensed jiu-jitsu schedule when we're healthy. Overall, I thought this was great work, so bravo. And if you have any questions about returning from injury, please let me know in the comments.